factory's still there. They're still chunking out the pipes, and they're still being sold at head shops all across the world. And I thought, wow, that could have been my life, because my brother had invented a little pipe, and that pipe was supposed to go on the market in like 1979. And you know what happened, right? So here I am, 50 years later, and life does some strange things. You know, I chose a different direction. I went in the military, joined the Air Force. I'm gonna get education. I'm gonna, go out there and come back and really, kind of find my path in the world. This is the way to do it. You know, all the things I had in front of me, a job where I could work my way up the ladder, loans and college and that route. I had friends that took all those routes. Military seemed like the way to go to me. And I was going for it. I was actually in Guam, USA, in the US Air Force, and I was on my way home from dinner all pumped up on my last Friday night on Guam, getting ready to go off on an adventure, see the world, and go to my next duty station. I had worked for months on this trip. It was gonna be awesome. I was gonna see Korea, and I was gonna see Vietnam, and I was gonna see the mainland Japan. It was gonna be awesome. And that's when I had my motorcycle wreck. Boom. Like, talking about change of direction. I mean, just in a split second, I had this contract already, ready to sign, that I was gonna go off and learn how to fly a helicopter. Actually, that was my plan in the military. I'd already talked to the Army recruiter, and he was gonna give me a pay raise. I was gonna cross the aisle from the Air Force to the Army, and I was gonna learn how to fly a helicopter. And I had a whole career path, but I got out on a disability. They did a medical board, determined that I was too broken up to continue, and sent me home. So I go home, and I actually picked a really cool field that I'm really proud of, even though I didn't fail out of it, but I didn't succeed because I didn't have cannabis access. And I got myself into one of the better schools, computer architecture, Virginia Polytechnic Institute, Virginia Tech. It's a program based on MIT's computer architecture program, ultra cool. But I just couldn't handle it. I kept running almost like it was a ramp. And I'd try up the ramp, I'd get two or thirds through the semester. That last semester I tried like 3 times, and I just couldn't do it. It just wasn't gonna happen. I left with a 4.0 average, and I could always go back, and I might, even though I'm getting old. But I left that path, and became an activist. It's funny, marijuana was my little hobby that I was doing in school at Virginia Tech. It was just something to, kind of keep me busy, connecting with my roots, trying to, hanging out with the kids. I swear to you, I spent half of the 1990s talking about the 70s around a joint, sitting around a table. Really, really cool. But I actually started at an information table, handing out flyers, and I worked my way up to speaking truth to power at the United Nations, representing every cannabis consumer on earth. And that was just this year. Right? April? Was this year? This year, 2021. So it's been a journey. I actually, I went over to Europe on that trip that I never took. I was gonna see all of Asia. I couldn't do it, I couldn't reproduce it. But I could actually go to Europe, and if I didn't have but one airfare, and I camped everywhere, and I took the train, I mean, it was like all this calculus, but I could pull it off, and I could do like 6 countries in 3 months. I spent most of my time in the Netherlands and in Greece. And that's where I cut my teeth really on some of the really neat stuff. I found myself in Amsterdam, hanging out with the Bronkhorst brothers and Ben Dronkers from the Sensi Seeds Hash Marijuana Museum, and Chris Conrad. And we're hanging out at this place called the Drugs Peace House, and we're working down the street at this little activist group called Green Prisoners Release. And the thing that Green Prisoners Release was doing was trying to fight extradition to the United States of a handful of marijuana prisoners. These people were sentenced to like hundreds of years, or facing hundreds of years of marijuana charges in the US. One charge that came up while I was there was Les and Cheryl Mooring, I think is his name, Les Mooring. They had a rough time of it. These guys in Amsterdam took a tray of seedlings, over 100, got on the train with an open tray of cannabis plants, went to The Hague and showed it to the government and said, here, this is what it looks like. This is what they're facing life in prison for. We just took the train over here with this openly, walking past every cop in Netherlands just to show you what they're facing life in prison. Are you really gonna send them back to the US? I don't know. Something about that whole experience really set me moving in a different direction than I had been in, in the activist circles inside the US. And when I got back, there was this new thing that you might have heard of since it's got really big. It's called the internet. But seriously, I don't know about how many around here are as old as I am, but when the internet came out and my thing that I was doing, I tried to print out every page that I found because stuff was golden. This information was fantastic. It's been hidden from us for so long. Print it all out. I still have boxes, big boxes full of information of everything that I printed out when the internet was young. But I found this page in another document you may have heard of. It's called the Constitution of the United States. In that document, it says that treaties, once they're ratified and approved by the states, these non-self-executing treaties, like the drug control treaty, the single convention on narcotic drugs that Nixon got us tied up to with Harry Anslinger, you might remember these names? It's still going on. We're still signed into this thing. It's still the treaty. It's still the law of the land, 186 countries. Our national law was written in 1971 in large part to implement our treaty obligations that we signed into in 1961. So when I found that treaty and that clause in the Constitution, it was like a dog with a bone, I just couldn't let go of it. I found my way again, working through the chain of command of our activist circles. I wound up in a meeting. I pulled a meeting together with Jack Herer, Dennis Perrone, Chris Conrad, out in a little field at Bill Condi's ranch out there at the Hemp Extravaganza, the first Hemp Extravaganza out in Oregon. I traveled 3,000 miles to have one conversation. And I talked to these guys about the international policy. I thought, oh man, in this marijuana movement, there must be people here and there in England or in USA, somewhere there's got to be a group already working on this. I'm going to join together with them. We're going to do some fantastic things. They looked at me and they said, hey, Mike, that sounds like a good idea. You ought to do that. So, I once honored and also completely crushed with the responsibility. I set out to bring the marijuana movement, as I see it, the worldwide cannabis movement, to the United Nations. The first effort we did was in 1998. That was at the World Drug Summit. And I didn't know that the previous drug summit, these things go like every 10 years. The previous drug summit was when they passed the last treaty against drugs. So I showed up like literally when the door opened and I just walked in. I swear I had no idea. But here we are. The cannabis movement is at the United Nations in 1998. It actually took from 1998 to 2008 to actually figure out what to do inside and how to interact with governments all across the world, how to actually work in this space, which is not political and it's not political. It's not legal and it's not legal. It's a surreal moment. When you're walking the halls of the UN, and there's little cliques of people that represent each country, and they're speaking their language of that country, and they're wearing the clothes of that country. And it's really important to understand, for those that hear treaty and UN and they cringe, I cringe too. But this isn't the cringeable stuff. This is like the UN drugs. It's like where the countries get together to do this together. There is no leadership on this, I assure you. I've been there. There's no, the United States, we're the leaders. We're the ones that have been leading this thing since 1961 at least. So when we change our policy right across the street here, and not that long in the future, when we change our policy, what's that going to do to the world? What is that going to do? How do we go back and fix the damage done by Harry Anslinger and his group that have been working on this for 100 years? How do we reverse the damage of the colonial powers really trying to wipe out not just the plant, not just the people growing the plant, the culture around the plant, the history of the plant. And it's a really interesting history. I've got it in my little bag there for those who want to see it. A Park Davis book that has cannabis flowers and tops that were approved by the Pure Food and Drugs Act of 1906. This would have been available to pharmacists and doctors and researchers and scientists and students in 1920, 1925, 1930 even. And then it was all wiped out in 1938 with the new federal law, that Marijuana Tax Act. And it's just amazing to me how much damage we've done. I mean, it's really kind of incalculable if you think about it. Think about the damage done from all, we know as cannabis consumers and as medicinal cannabis advocates, we know that a lot of people use cannabis and they put down other drugs. It may be some sort of trigger to someone who's of using drugs. Cannabis is a drug of abuse. It can be. But it's also an exit drug. It's a drug for so many people to get off of the cycle of addiction, to get out of alcohol abuse, and to break the stranglehold that pain medicine has on them as a patient. Even to help with post-traumatic stress and stuff like that, to alleviate some of the need for some of these psychiatric drugs, which are a mental prison, and actually cause such horrific side effects that it's not comparable to cannabis. So here I am, I'm fighting this good fight. I'm gonna do what I can. We've got so many efforts that connect. I was introduced as VAMJ, DCMJ's offshoot VAMJ, very proud of that. Within just 1 year of creation, we legalized cannabis in Virginia. That's not a coincidence. So we have a lot of infrastructure, but it's not really being applied right now. And I don't even know where to go. I got so many different things in my head. I can go so many different ways, but I just want to leave you all with a little bit of hope and a little bit of work. The hope is that we're finding a path. We're finding a path out of this. And cannabis is the torch. It's not just breaking down the walls of prohibition for cannabis, but hopefully we'll open up the path for the end of prohibition as we know it, that has filled the prisons, that has caused the horrendous upside down world of reality that we know of drugs, that actually puts drugs on the schoolyard and prevents older people from getting into pharmacy. They don't want to say that, but that's the reality, right? The drug war puts drugs in the hands of children. The policy that we're enforcing in the United States right now puts drugs in the hands of children. Drug policy reform seeks to take the drugs out of the children's hands and put them into responsible hands of adults, of children that have medical conditions under medical supervision and with their parents, and to save the economies of struggling nations that have been held under the thumb of the United States for too long under the rubric of the war on drugs. Because nothing lasts forever. The war on drugs may be our lifetime status quo, but I'm watching it crumble from where I stand. And it won't just crumble to create equity and stop the racism inherent in the drug war. No, it's gonna go beyond that, and it's gonna help bring down the walls of tyranny that have led this world for over 100 years in the war on drugs. It has to end. It has to end now. Cannabis isn't a panacea. It's not a cure-all. But it might just be the medicine to help us cure our war on drugs addiction. I want to give you all a lot of love. I told you I'd give you a homework assignment. And I'm going to give you that homework assignment. It's a tall order. As we create legal, regulated adult access to cannabis, medical cannabis is getting swept away. It's getting lost in the shuffle. And it's just a nuance of history, really. The war on drugs in 1971, all right, get this. 1938, Marijuana Tax Act, you could still prescribe cannabis. You could still use cannabis. You could still deliver it in the pharmacy. They just wouldn't give any new people the knowledge, right? They wouldn't give any new people, and they pulled it out of the textbooks in 1942. So any new people that came up wouldn't even know to look for it. That's how they strangled it and made it go away. But until 1969, you could still prescribe cannabis and receive it at the pharmacy. It was the new law, the Marijuana in the Controlled Substances Act, that actually first, in my knowledge, in my research, the first in human history that we've ever stopped people from. Even worse, declaring cannabis doesn't have medical value by law. Every day that we've gone past it, let's pick a line in the sand. 2017, Institute of Medicine, National Academies of Science, landmark study number 4, where they finally put down their foot and said cannabis has medical value. So let's make that the line in the sand. Every day since 2017, our federal law has been lying to us. I mean, what does that mean when the federal law itself is a lie? That's a really interesting question. And that's an open question. But that's where we're at. And because of that lie, the federal government doesn't know anything about medical cannabis. They don't know it. They've been giving cannabis to people in these big tins. You might have seen Irv Rosenfeld here with a big tin. They've been giving these joints since the 1970s. But hear me again. They don't know anything about medical marijuana. That was just, sort of a side door that was created. They never studied it. They never looked into it. They never listened. We had to do our own study just to see if those patients were still around about 10, 15 years ago. And they were all doing great, even with big cans of shitty weed. But here we are, 2021, on the verge of federal legalization, and the group that's going to legalize it doesn't know what medical marijuana is. The vast majority of state laws are medical cannabis access programs, not adult regulated legal access programs. And I always felt as a beginning activist that this was the laboratory of the states, that the federal government was going to learn from what the states are doing. Well, let me give you a couple of words just to type down in Google and go into a rabbit hole. The Dormant Commerce Clause. Type that into Google and see where that brings you. Because everything we set up in the states is disappearing on day one, unless these guys across the street write a new draft. Because the draft that they wrote doesn't even mention the Dormant Commerce Clause. So that's your homework assignment. Save medical marijuana. Save it. Preserve it. Preserve everything that we've learned and everything that we've done in these states to deliver high quality cannabis products from a variety of plant source materials in a vast variety of different modes of administration. And we need to preserve all that. None of it's FDA approved. None of it's legal under federal law. And the vast majority of it is pretty good under state programs that are well regulated. And these programs must survive. And the federal government must accommodate them as we move forward, even as, the part I love about the Dormant Commerce Clause, even as I, as a veteran, will travel from state to state with my cannabis with impunity, because it will be legal in the United States, and there will be a state in the union that can oppose that. And that's another thing we need to preserve. Those are two different sides of the same coin. We may be fighting against ourselves on that one. It's not easy stuff. It's complicated. Need your help. What time is it?
4:26.
Yeah.
Happy 420, everybody.
We got 11.
6 minutes longer.
We did it.
Yeah, we did it. 4 hours and 20 minutes of protest.
4 hours and 20 minutes of protest. We conclude
Extra 5.
We conclude this altered consciousness program exercise.
We never took the group photo, but that's okay.
Do now.
And we send you our love.
We're gonna let it. Thank you. I was just looking at our press conference. Wow, there's a lot of
somewhat back, but I think after what you said and talking about Carmel there, I think I want to give you
Nice, Statue of Liberty.
yeah, look at our torch. Look at our lead.
some of the stuff. Ford Fischer.
So let me
That's me.
Okay, yeah. So I didn't. Your video. We're retweeting it from our account, but this video here has 9,000 views already. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Are people? Is this done or are people smoking? Like, I'm still live, but huh?
You can put me on camera. We're not smoking.
All right. Well,
We made a strategic decision not to smoke. We actually made a strategic decision to get a permit, to answer every question, to actually try to accommodate every request. because frankly, these police who are in our community, I'm part of this community, have been freaking traumatized this year. Traumatized. And our whole culture of protest has been thrown up in the air. Well, and I just wanted, we wanted to come back and just have a regular protest that's peaceful. People feel comfortable, families can be here, where staffers feel like they can walk up and listen, where someone who's casually walking by can hear. But we don't want to it's funny, I wish there were 300, for the 360,000 people that were arrested last year, I wish there were like mobs ready to go crazy, because I think we would get the change really fast. But instead, the mobs went crazy for a liar, a total liar. And and we're like really sincerely here. So anyway, I just what's been the politics of this country, the violent politics of this country is not to be found among the stoners. I'm sorry. I know some violent protesters do smoke weed. You should smoke more. Okay, you're not smoking enough, right? But one time I was someone who considered violent protests legitimate when I was younger. I was accused by this old hippie, "You're a street fighting man." And I was like, because I was masked up and had a gas mask and was in the Black Bloc back in 2000, World Make IMF protests. And I saw these recent protests, I'm like, these protests are way more violent than what we were doing in 99 and 2000. On both sides, police and protesters.
It's definitely amped up.
It's amped up. I mean, the graffiti, the property destruction during the last summer's Black Lives Matter protests was unprecedented in DC history, except for maybe the 68 riots, which really destroyed much of the city. But as far as vandalism, it was like off the charts. And I'm coming to the conclusion, I'm 48 years old last week. Violence isn't the answer. Violence scares most of the public. Violence is not uplifting and hopeful. And we live in a dangerous, dark world, and there's enough of that. Our politics should be hopeful and spiritual, and our leaders should work to strive to be examples. We don't have examples right now, and I do blame both parties, but especially the Republicans.
I sort of have seen you do civil disobedience. To be clear, not violence, but smoking when it's illegal, right? Or semi-illegal.
That's pure civil disobedience, non-violent civil disobedience, smoking.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that as a
maybe
tactic?
If I smoked in the building, I wouldn't consider it entirely peaceful, because you literally are putting smoke in the air that other people are going to inhale, so you've affected them. I'm into consent. I want a consensual society. I want a society where people have a lot of personal responsibility too. And I don't want a nanny state.
Right.
The drug war is part of the nanny state. It's like the worst of the nanny state. And so libertarians and people who hate the U.S. government for one reason or the other, I know watch your stuff. And I'm also Jewish, and I'm really sensitive to anti-Semitic stuff. I don't want anyone calling anyone a Nazi at this rally. We had a whole talk ahead of him, no Nazi comparisons. These are rules that basically all movements should adapt. You should never talk about killing anybody. You should never talk about Nazi. That person's like a Nazi. You should also probably not bring up COVID. Because in our own group, there's a disagreement about vaccines. We agreed to respect, mutual respect, and I'm pro-vaccine, and we gave away joints.
Yeah, I saw that you gave away joints to people who would joints for jabs, right?
We gave away 10,000 joints in New York and DC, and it was a community effort. About 30 people donating cannabis. It was an amazing effort, and we could do cool stuff. Politics could be awesome and amazing and transformative, but the violence has got to stop. And these guys are so freaked out, so they're bringing it back to the Capitol Police.
Right.
Because I've watched your stuff a lot. I didn't realize who you were until just now.
Okay.
And that just shows how clueless I am. But you have been out there at some protests that I'm like, what is going on? Who are all these armed people? On all sides, right wing, left wing, armed people. And I'm like, wow, I'm a little out of touch perhaps, with the street protest scene in the last few years or whatever it's turned into now. And it has been really quiet around DC since January 6th. We've had very few. We had Sharpton mobilize a significant number of people back in August to Lincoln Memorial. Everyone else is struggling to get turnout. There's sort of a mood of I don't want to go to Capitol Hill. That place would give me flashbacks. you know. And
Right. Even though your movement obviously is like not even remotely similar to the people who stormed the Capitol, like it sounds like it's changed organizing in DC for you. Do you want to talk more about that?
Well,
Like how
has changed organizing because we all agreed not to organize. You know, we had a thing on the mall called Catharsis on the Mall back in November for a week. It was like a vigil against the drug war, and it was also like part of healing with psychedelics, and it was during the election. We just passed a ballot initiative, Initiative 81, that decriminalized psychedelics here in DC. So that was like where our mindset was being out in the streets, but it was controversial. Like so many people in our own group were like, you guys are killing people by being out there in groups. And it's like, you know, we weren't vaccinated yet, and you know, it was a little risky, but we also felt like, I went out for Black Lives Matter protests because I thought it was important, and I went out at the Republican National Convention protests, and I thought it was important, and I went out for the election week because I thought it was important. The rest of the time I was hiding in my house like everyone else, okay? I was barely hanging out with anybody. But sometimes you just sort of make, all right, this is life, I'm taking this chance. We're living with it's an endemic at this point. It's going to be an endemic if people don't get real and get vaccinated. I want to ask you if you're vaccinated, but I'm not. I'm not going to ask.
I've posted a selfie. I mean, I am.
You are
but
vaccinated. Well,
yeah.
good. Because I think people who are vaccinated are trying to help the situation, not hurt the situation. There's so many people willing just to hurt the situation and make it worse. Almost like they want everything to fail. And I like to live in a society where you can go to a concert without wearing a mask. You know, I went to a concert with 3,000 people the other day. Wearing a mask for hours and hours in a big crowded space is not fun. Like, let's come on, people. Like, can we please just get vaccinated? Like
Is that a
90%?
controversial position though within the marijuana community?
Absolutely. So many of the marijuana consumers around the United States and activists who are, like in California, for instance, have been anti-vax. And they organized a pretty serious anti-vax protest at a vaccination center at the beginning of the pandemic. Like, it was a few months in. I'm sorry, beginning of the vaccination period. It was like right when it started, and they had to shut the vaccination site down, and all these people were turned away. And then these people also had marijuana signs, and I was like, this makes us look horrible. And I felt like we had to do something and squarely put cannabis activism with the vaccine, that we believe in science, that science stood with legalization of cannabis years ago, when we first had the reports that it was actually medicine and that there was efficacy, and Institute of Medicine was standing with cannabis. So it's like, hey, science has been standing with us. We need to stand with damn science at this point. And forget the pharmaceutical companies. Like, there's a difference between the science and pharmaceutical companies. The science is, we should support science. Don't confuse the two. Like, greedy capitalist pigs who own science and patent it, okay, versus, you know, good science for the world, for humanity. If it wasn't for science, we'd all die. Our water supply would not be safe if we didn't know science. Come on, people. Trust math and science. Trust the engineers. They're not out to kill you. They're out to keep you alive. So the engineers, the GMO, I'm against GMOs. I walked from New York City to the White House in 2011 with like 100 people, 300 miles, demanding GMO labeling of foods.
Was that one of the March Against Monsanto's?
Yes, it was the first march against Monsanto. It was the very. It was actually also when Occupy was happening. We call ourselves Occupy Monsanto. So, and we showed up, and we were occupying for a long time. But getting back to that period, getting back to today, the GMO mRNA technology that's necessary to make vaccines that are 90+% effective initially, they eventually lose effectiveness, which is unacceptable. Those vaccines are here because of GMOs. And so I'm like with David Bronner from Dr. Bronner's, I'm with him, and he says there are GMOs we should still be fighting, and those are the ones that increase chemical application in the field, which ends up in our food, and the plant can withstand all these chemicals, Roundup Ready crops. That was the only marketable trait of the GMO crops, was they could spray more chemicals on them. But I don't want to eat chemical-laden food. We know it causes cancer. You know, we have the glyphosate lawsuits now. We know, we've been proven right. But the situation with this mRNA technology that's been peer-reviewed, has gone through, I know emergency trials now has gone through the full
Now it's
trial.
fully approved,
It's
yeah.
fully approved. But at the time it wasn't, and there was an argument there to be made that was somewhat legitimate, that it hadn't been fully approved, that you're a guinea pig. And okay, but can you read a spreadsheet? Because basically this spreadsheet tells me that this stuff's working. It's actually working remarkably well, and we should be enthusiastically taking it. The risks seem extremely low at this time, and if there are risks long term, okay, then we'll learn something. But that'll be factored into the next big decision. But right now, you should take it, and because there's an overwhelming evidence that it's safe and effective. And there's a brother named Phone Homie. I don't know, he might be watching even. He's on Instagram. He has a huge following. He's a dabber. He makes concentrates. He's in this community. He's supported our protests. He donates to our causes, and he actually donated cannabis to Joints for Jabs. He never got vaccinated. He wanted other people to get vaccinated, but it wasn't for him. And he's been a former Marine. He just spent like the last 3 months in a coma, and he's costing the taxpayers millions of dollars in healthcare coverage. No, I want my brother to like recover, and he is. He's walking again. He can barely talk. It's like he's been on a respirator for so long. He weighs like less than 90 pounds. Like it's like he's barely alive, but he's making a comeback, and everyone's rooting for him, and I'm rooting for him too. And I'm like, why couldn't you just gotten vaccinated? And whatever, you are living proof. Like, cause even if he survives this, it's been a horrible experience. And there's so many people getting affected. We have 690,000 flags down the street right now. A flag for every person. It's an unbelievable sight. I really encourage people to go and look at that. And like, that's real. Like, this is really happening. It's hard to see it because it's still a small fraction of the overall population, but it's happening now. It's in the, every 100 people you hear horrible stories. And can we just take the fucking vaccine? All right. And so I want Joints for Jabs to like be the counterbalance to people who are not listening to science, they're listening to ideology. And I'd rather have science-based decisions, fact-based decisions, data-based decisions. And that goes for these guys here in the Senate on everything, including whether someone's guilty of sedition or not. Let's just listen to the facts and let the chips fall where they may.
How do you see kind of the utility of like trying to intersect with other issues, like as the End the Drug War movement, like touching on GMOs, vaccine, like other issues that people might care about?
I'm definitely.
Does it broaden the coalition or does it narrow it?
Well, first of all, repositioning cannabis as pro-vaccine was very strategic. Okay, I don't want to be lumped in with Marjorie Taylor Greene and anti-vax movement for people. That's crazy. I wanted to be lumped in with the vast majority of Americans that are on board for vaccinations. And some were a little on board, and some were a lot on board. Some need to see other people on board before they were on board. They would be the last people to take the vaccine. I understand. Everyone has their threshold of when they make that decision. Some people are going to make it more easily than others. And others, some people can't take it, and I respect that. There's a reason why you can't take it, you have autoimmune diseases and things like that. So we have to protect those people. That's why other people should take it. I know the vaccine's not perfect either. I know there's breakthrough infections, but that's a tiny fraction of the infections. And that still proves our point. Like, you can tell me all you want, there are breakthrough infections. There's just so many outrageous comments that we got when we did Joints for Jabs. We got trolled really hard by the anti-vax. And I know what I do with those people. I'm like, I'm blocking you. Like, I don't have to listen to you.
Do you know how many people got jabs corresponding to your Joints for Jabs? Do you know?
How many we got?
How many people did you get vaccinated?
Oh.
Or give people joints to get vaccinated?
Every single person who got a joint had to have been vaccinated. We checked their cards. That was the way you got a joint.
Right.
It was like Krispy Kreme. By the way, we announced on January 12th that we were going to give away thousands of joints later in the year when the vaccine was widely available. A week later, Krispy Kreme announced free donuts for a year.
They kind of go together.
I know, and I was like, they totally saw us acting and getting a ton of press. Because we did. When we announced it, we got press all over the world. All over the world. It was a global story. It was the biggest story of the year for this organization. It was that we're going to give away weed outside vaccination centers. And we did it at 38 vaccination centers in DC in one day. And we did it in Union Square in New York. And it was just a one, and I told them, I was like thinking COVID, I was like, decentralized, no large crowds, don't even tell people where we're gonna be, just tell them, go get vaccinated on 420 and you'll probably get a joint, because we're literally covering most of the vaccination sites. So, New York City, they were like, yeah, we're doing it in Union Square. I was like, you guys are gonna have a huge crowd, and they did. They had this like 2,000 person line, and I was like, you know,
Right.
like guys, like, we were really trying here, but you know what? The publicity was high, and the vibes were high, and like the story kept getting covered, and the photos kept getting used, and it was like, wow, that was the best idea we've had in a couple years.
Maybe a good way to wrap it would be like, what do you see as sort of the future or the direction of this? Like, especially if they don't end up descheduling marijuana, you know, where do you see it going from here?
If they don't deschedule, if they don't pass the MORE Act, I'm hopeful we'll actually get a vote before the midterm election. That really makes it clear who stands where. I mean, we're pretty much at that end game at this point where like no one's gonna budge, so just vote, let's know who's where, and we can start organizing. I mean, it would advantage the legalization side to have the vote sooner than later. So that's what we're kind of telling Chuck Schumer today. So I just think we might actually get that if they listen, because we're not mean people. We're like, we want to support certain people in there. We do support. I give money to people in there. I'm not an anarchist. I was at one time. I'm not anymore. I may be dressed in black. I am not an anarchist. And I love anarchists to death. And I think it's a wonderful spirit to be an anarchist. And I think anarchists contribute a lot to our democracy without even voting. But I do think people should vote. I think we should. I'm not for tearing down the U.S. government. I don't want to live through a bloody revolution. I'm sorry, it would be bloody. We can't do it, guys. And then we'd still have to rebuild this shit. You know? So, I mean, why do we want to tear it all down? And it's come on, let's get more positive. Everyone needs to take mushrooms and get more positive.
All right, fair enough. That might be a good note to end on. I'll close it there.